The sun had not kissed the village in nearly a year. Clouds passed, mocking the sky with shadows, but never gave rain. The fields cracked like old skin. The river that once fed the rice paddies now lay like a scar of dust. Even the sea had begun to retreat from the shore, as if ashamed. People no longer spoke in full voices. They whispered, their mouths dry, their skin gray with the fine salt that blew in from the coast. And in the huts built from driftwood and prayers, families began to make choices no family should ever make. Amara's family lived on the edge of the village, closest to the rocks where the tide died. Their hut had once been full of music, a father who carved flutes, a mother who danced, 2 boys who beat sticks against the walls for rhythm. Amara had never sung. She listened. She watched. She learned. She was the quiet child, the strange one, the one who spoke to seashells and stood too long beneath the moon. People said she was born wrong, too pale, too silent, too still. Others said she was born touched by something older than human things. But drought makes monsters of men, even gentle ones. When the second planting failed and the baby cousin died with cracked lips and a bloated belly, Amara's mother stopped dancing. Her father snapped his flute over his knee. The boys began to steal, then lie, then sleep without words. Amara, still silent, still watching, saw the days darken and the nights stretch thin. She began to understand that something was coming. It came one morning, a creaking cart, the clink of metal, the smell of rust and brine. A salt merchant, wrapped in heavy black robes that did not fit the season, arrived at the village center. He bore a single bag of salt, full, white, heavy, slung across the back of a limping donkey. The people gathered like moths. They stared. One man offered fish bones, another, a bloodstone ring. But the merchant shook his head. He only wanted one thing. A daughter, he said. A quiet one. No one spoke. Then a woman stepped forward. She didn't look at Amara. She didn't say her name. She simply pointed, slowly, like a blade drawn from a wound. Amara's father wept, not loudly, but the way a hut weeps in the wind, soft and broken. The merchant nodded. A bargain was struck. Salt for silence. The bag was dropped at their feet. A white heap. Glimmering. Enough to preserve meat. Enough to trade for grain. Enough to survive a little longer. And Amara? She was told nothing. She wasn't bound, or beaten, or dragged. She stood. Brushed the dust from her hem. Looked at her mother once, long and hard, until the woman turned away. Then she walked. Past the watching children. Past the elders pretending not to see. Past the boy who once kissed her forehead and called her tideborn. She walked to the waiting boat, where the merchant sat like a shadow, and stepped in without a word. The boat creaked as it pushed from shore. Oars bit into the glassy water. The village grew smaller. The waves swallowed her outline. No one followed. No one cried out. Only the wind rose, as if to ask where the girl had gone. Her footprints on the beach remained for a moment longer, fragile dents in the dust, before the sea sighed once, and swept them away. Later that night, the salt bag lay untouched in the hut. The father couldn't bring himself to open it. The mother sat beside it, running her fingers over the cloth like it was skin. The boys watched the fire die. Outside, the sky remained dry. But far out to sea, a single bird screamed over the waves. And beneath the surface, something began to stir. Not vengeance. Not yet. Just memory. Just salt. The boat was no sanctuary. It was a floating cage, creaking wood stained with rust, ropes frayed from old battles with storms, and a single red sail that flapped like torn skin. The merchant had no name. Or if he did, he had shed it like a snake's husk long ago. He was known only by his cargo, salt, girls, and silence. Amara sat in the lowest part of the ship, where the walls leaked and the air tasted of mold and iron. No one spoke to her at first. The other girls watched her the way one might watch a dying star, too far away, too strange to touch. She didn't speak. Didn't scream. Didn't cry. That made them nervous. Some whispered that she was mute. Others whispered that she had chosen silence, which was worse. On the third day, the merchant gave her nothing but fish water and a crust of bitter bread. When she didn't eat, he laughed and called her a spoiled catch. When she still didn't speak, he forced her to scrub the deck in the sun until her hands blistered and her neck peeled. She obeyed. Not out of fear. Not out of surrender. But because there was nothing else to do. At night, the ship creaked with voices. The girls, 6 of them, ranging from too young to just old enough to be sold, huddled in the hold and told stories they weren't supposed to know. Tales passed down by wet nurses, whispered between sisters, half remembered from grandmothers now buried beneath sand. They told of the salt-eyed, girls taken by the sea but never truly drowned. Girls who cried no tears because the ocean had already claimed their sorrow. Girls whose blood ran thick with brine, whose hearts beat like drums beneath the waves. They said such girls were dangerous. Or cursed. Or maybe they were lucky, depending on who you asked. She doesn't blink when the wind howls, one of the younger girls whispered, nodding toward Amara. I think she's one of them. The oldest of the girls spat on the floor. Salt-eyed are just bones the sea forgot to bury. She's just quiet. But that night, when thunder crawled across the sky and waves slapped the hull like angry hands, Amara stood at the edge of the ship and stared into the storm. Her hair clung to her face like seaweed. Her skin shimmered, not with oil or sweat, but something finer. Something sharp. The merchant found her there. Dripping. Still silent. You think you're too good for the rest, he growled, grabbing her by the shoulder. You'll scream like the others before I'm done. She said nothing. That enraged him more than any insult. The slap came fast. A backhand, heavy with rings. Her lips split. Blood pooled in her mouth, metallic, bitter, salted. He struck her again. And again. The other girls crouched in the shadows, wide-eyed, too afraid to move. Rain poured like boiling oil from the sky. Wind howled like a wounded god. And then it happened. He raised his fist once more, but before it could fall, the ship lurched violently. A wave rose like a hand out of the sea, towering, roiling, black with rage. The merchant staggered. Amara swayed but did not fall. Then, almost gently, she leaned back and let herself go overboard. No scream. No splash loud enough to mark it. Just a quiet surrender to the sea. The girls screamed. The merchant cursed. But Amara was gone. Below the surface, time stopped. The cold should have bitten her. The dark should have smothered her. But the ocean welcomed her like an old friend. She didn't sink. She drifted. Down, down, past coral kingdoms and drowned altars. Past fish with moonlit eyes and forests of swaying weeds. She opened her eyes, and the salt did not sting. She opened her mouth, and did not choke. Her blood joined the sea, drop by drop, warm and slow, and the sea answered. Not with words. With memory. She saw faces in the water. Women whose ribs were cages of pearls. Children with starfish crowns. 1,000, 1,000,000 forgotten names, all staring at her, all whispering without tongues. You were sold, they said. You were silenced. You were not the first. And Amara, for the first time, spoke, not aloud, but within. Her voice rippled out like sound in a shell. I will not be the last. The sea heard her. The salt heard her. The currents shifted. The moon dimmed. Something deep below turned its gaze upward. And the girl who fell with blood on her lips and a storm in her chest was no longer sinking. She was being carried, not to the bottom, but somewhere older. Somewhere the ocean had not forgotten. Where the drowned waited. Where the salt-eyed were born. There was no up, no down, no breath nor pressure. Amara floated in something that was not water, but not air either, thick, glowing, heavy with old voices and the hush of forgotten prayers. She was neither wet nor dry. Her wounds did not hurt. Her skin did not sting. She drifted as if she were a thought, not a body. Light surrounded her, soft and pulsing, like heartbeats in the distance. Shapes moved beyond her peripheral vision, not fish, not beasts, but echoes. Long strands of memory drifted like kelp, brushing against her gently, asking nothing, only remembering. Time slowed until it broke entirely. Seconds stretched like horizon lines, moments folded into themselves. This was not the sea she had known. It was older. It was beneath the sea that lived above, a layer deeper, richer, hidden from the living and held by the dead. Her feet found something solid, though she could not see it. It felt like sand made of bone. A current wrapped around her shoulders like a shawl. From the shadows rose the drowned. They did not walk. They glided. They shimmered in shades of gray and green and deep, glowing blues. Women with fishbone earrings and hair like ink. Children with sea glass eyes. Men whose backs were still bent from the chains they'd worn. None of them looked surprised to see her. "You made it," one of the women said. Her voice was layered, dozens of voices in one. "She's salt-eyed," murmured a child, placing a smooth shell in Amara's hand before fading backward into the mist. Then the sea opened. Not parted, not split, opened, like a jaw. From within came the sound of creaking wood, rusted chains, coral grinding against coral. The water darkened into 1,000 impossible colors, and from it rose something massive, ancient, and alive. The Sea Mother. She was built from shipwrecks, her shoulders formed of shattered hulls, her hips wrapped in anchor chains, her crown made of barnacled bones and whale teeth. Her skin was coral and current and storm. Her eyes were tidal pools with no bottom. Amara did not run. The Sea Mother bent her massive form until her face hovered close to the girl's. Her breath was the scent of salt, lightning, and long-decayed flowers. "You are not dead," the Sea Mother said. "You are claimed." Amara did not speak. Her voice had no weight here yet. "You were sold. Marked. Taken. You are not the first. But you remembered your name as you fell. And that matters." She reached out a hand, long fingers webbed with seaweed and starlight, and touched Amara's brow. A jolt ran through her, not pain but remembrance. She saw her village. Her mother's hand, pointing. The bag of salt. The waves. Her fall. The voices. The hunger. The rage. The Sea Mother withdrew. "You will not become what he made you," she said. "You will become what you choose." Amara tried to move, but her limbs were slow, heavy, uncertain. So the drowned came closer. They circled her in silence. One brushed her skin with ink and carved shapes across her arms, old symbols, language from before language. Another placed shards of mirror around her feet, reflections of her face at different ages, as if all versions of her had been waiting to meet. One whispered into her ear, a lullaby sung by the first girl who ever drowned, and Amara's spine grew taller in response. Her dress turned to threads of seaweed and glass. Her scars softened. Her eyes grew darker, deeper, and full of tides. Her heartbeat slowed, then reawakened, in rhythm with the waves. The Sea Mother nodded. "She remembers," she said. "She knows the silence of betrayal. She knows the hunger of the sea. She has swallowed grief and it did not break her." From a hidden place in her chest, the Sea Mother drew a small orb, swirling with a storm of salt, wind, and fire. It pulsed. "This is the breath of the drowned," she said. "It is yours now. You may shape it." Amara reached out, hesitated, then took it. It didn't burn. It became part of her, sinking into her palm like a seed. And just like that, she was. She stood, no longer a drifting thought but a thing forged in tide and fury. Her name echoed in the waters, not shouted, not begged, spoken. Amara. The drowned bowed their heads. She looked up through the currents above her, toward the surface, the light, the place where her body had once belonged. It no longer called her in the way it had. But it pulled at her all the same. The Sea Mother watched her gaze. "When you return," she said softly, "it will not be as you were." Amara nodded. Because she understood something now. This place was not her grave. It was her womb. And she had just been born. Time did not pass in the sea's womb, it breathed. Some days were minutes. Some moments stretched longer than the oldest trees could remember. Light filtered in from nowhere, dim and silver, and Amara learned to move with it, not chasing, not waiting, just moving. Each step left ripples not in water, but in memory. Every time she closed her eyes, she opened another. She lived now among the drowned, but they were not the dead. They were what remained after injustice, after ropes, fire, betrayals, and falls from great heights. Some had walked into the sea with rocks in their arms. Some had been thrown. Some had simply disappeared one day beneath the weight of what the world would not forgive. They did not weep here. They did not age. They became. And so would she. The Sea Mother gave her a guide, a woman named Kasira, whose body was wrapped in glowing threads of eel skin and stars. Her voice was low and rough, like wind under doors. She was older than any storm Amara had known, and her eyes were the color of deep trenches no ship dared pass. She taught without mercy and without praise. "You are of salt now," Kasira said. "You cannot rot. But you can still forget. And forgetting is death." So Amara learned. She learned to speak to the tide, not with words, but with breath and bone. She stood for hours in the echo chambers of shipwrecks, listening to how silence stretched and folded. She was taught how to raise waves with a finger, how to calm them with a hum. She learned to open her palms and feel the pull of moons she could not see. She ran her hands across the bellies of leviathans and did not flinch when they blinked. She could now summon wind like a lullaby. But power did not come alone. Each time she pulled a current, she felt the ache of chains on wrists not hers. Each time she stilled a storm, she tasted the copper mouth of someone else's last breath. Kasira warned her, "The sea holds." The village had changed, but not truly. New children played in the dust where old ones had once wept. The roofs sagged deeper. The trees leaned more. The temple had crumbled, and no one bothered to rebuild it. They prayed in silence now, if at all, and their gods were smaller, shaped from scraps, not stone. There was no memory of the girl who had vanished into the merchant's boat. Her name had been spoken once in a drunken story, mispronounced, mistaken for a myth. Her family was gone. Her hut rotted to the ground. The bag of salt long eaten, traded, forgotten. But the ocean remembered. One morning, the tide did not recede. It curled higher against the rocks, lapping at the toes of the children collecting shells. The fishermen frowned but said nothing. Perhaps a storm was coming, they told themselves. But the sky was clear. The clouds were far. The water stayed. By afternoon, the sea had touched the village path. Salt kissed the ankles of goats and soaked into the hems of old women's skirts. Still, no one panicked. They built small barriers of driftwood and shouted at the water like it might feel shame. The elders murmured that such tides had come before, in their grandparents' time, perhaps, or in some legend best left dusty. But that night, no one slept. Because the sea began to hum. A low, endless sound, like a mother's breath, slow and steady, but with the weight of something vast beneath it. The dogs howled. The fish swam backward in their buckets. Babies opened their eyes at once and cried without reason. And then, just before dawn, she appeared. A figure cloaked in seaskin and moonlight, walking upright from the center of the ocean. No boat. No sail. No footsteps. The water made way for her, then followed where she stepped, licking at her heels like a loyal animal. Her face was shadowed, but her eyes were not, they glowed faintly, too bright for any human thing, too still. They held the slow weight of centuries. The hush of deep places. No one recognized her. But everyone felt her. They came out of their homes, barefoot and weary. Men who'd once hunted sharks shrank behind their wives. Women clutched their children. The bravest of them stepped forward. "Who are you?" he asked. The figure tilted her head, as if considering whether the question deserved an answer. Then she said, simply, "I was Salt." Her voice was low. It did not echo, it resonated. It filled the spaces between the ribs. It stirred the bones. Someone gasped. An old woman dropped to her knees, pressing her forehead into the wet earth. "I dreamed of you," she whispered. "You were a child. You walked into the sea with blood on your mouth." The cloaked woman said nothing. She walked forward. The sea followed. Each step she took, the tide inched higher. It flowed around houses, kissed the stones of the forgotten shrine. It swept past broken fences and over the spot where once, long ago, a girl had stood as her mother pointed toward a merchant's boat. No one stopped her. They simply watched. Their mouths were dry again, not from drought this time, but from the taste of memory. Children asked, "Is she a ghost?" No one answered. Old men muttered prayers to gods they had not spoken to in decades. One tried to touch her robe. It melted in his fingers, left only damp salt and the scent of wind. The sun rose fully now, painting the village in gold. But it was the kind of gold that comes before a storm, too bright, too brittle. The cloaked figure stopped at the center of the village. The sea stilled. Her hood slipped. And the face beneath was both unfamiliar and terribly known. Skin dark as wet stone. Eyes vast as oceans. A face that had forgotten how to be young. She did not cry. She did not rage. She simply stood. And the villagers, one by one, remembered a girl who never screamed, never fought, and never returned. Until now. The sea did not roar. It whispered. And its whispers clung to the villagers like damp cloth, heavy, inescapable, full of things they had tried to forget. The cloaked figure stood beneath the sun, water pooling around her feet, and the villagers stood at the edge of their own silence, unable to look away. Her presence was not loud, not violent. But it unraveled them. She turned first to the man who had once offered her a fig when they were both children. He was older now, his beard streaked with gray, his shoulders hunched from years of fishing with too small nets and too little luck. He looked into her face and blinked hard, recognition rising like bile. He started, but his voice caught. She raised her hand, and the sea responded, a ripple pulsing outward. "You told them I was strange," she said. "You called me tide-touched. You laughed when the merchant took me. You said, she was never really one of us." He staggered back as the tide licked at his knees. A vision shimmered in the water beside him, a younger version of himself, laughing with his friends as Amara boarded the boat, throwing a stone into the waves as if to seal the deal. His face twisted in horror. "I was just a boy," he whispered. "I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," she replied. Her voice was not cruel. It was quiet. Clean. Like a blade washed in rain. He fell to his knees. The water cradled him, but did not carry him away. She moved on. The woman who had pointed. The mother who had traded a daughter for salt. She had aged. Time had not been kind. Her body was bent, her eyes sunken. She sat on a crumbling step with a bowl of water between her hands, not drinking, just holding it, as if waiting for it to become holy. Amara stopped before her. The villagers held their breath. "I watched you sleep," she said. "After the trade. I saw how you turned your face to the wall. I saw how you salted your food with shaking hands." The woman did not look up. "I was desperate," she said. "We had nothing. You didn't speak. You didn't even cry. You didn't ask why I was silent," Amara said. "You assumed it meant I agreed." The water rose higher, curling around the old woman's ankles. Amara knelt and placed a single seashell into her lap, smooth, translucent, filled with a faint glow. Inside it, the woman saw herself as she was then, standing before the merchant, choosing. No hunger, no heat, just the choice, cold and absolute. She began to weep. Real tears this time. Salt joined salt. Amara stood. I am not here to punish you, she said. I am here to remind you what you did. The old woman wept harder. But Amara had already turned away. She found the brothers next. One had fled the village years ago and returned only when the land began to drown. The other had stayed, grown a beard, married, and buried 2 sons. They stood side by side, tense as rope. You were supposed to protect me, Amara said. The younger one trembled. We were children. We didn't know they'd actually. You watched. You didn't stop it. You laughed when he gave you sugar cubes. The elder's eyes flashed with something sharper than guilt. We suffered too, he said. We paid for it in other ways. Amara stared at him. You think suffering equals redemption? He opened his mouth, then closed it. She raised her hand again. The sea moved like breath. A wave curled upward, and within it, they saw themselves, standing by the shoreline, the merchant's bag of salt in their arms. They saw Amara watching them. Not weeping. Not speaking. Just watching. Knowing. She trusted us, the younger brother whispered. No, Amara said, her voice firm. I never trusted you. I simply never had a choice. The wave dropped. The tide inched higher. The villagers began to murmur. Some wept. Some fled into their homes, pulling shutters tight against the rising sea. Others dropped to their knees, whispering old prayers to gods long gone. But Amara moved through them like tide, unstoppable, deliberate, soft only on the surface. She found the merchant's son, the boy who had inherited his father's trade and tried to clean it of its blood. He had renamed it. Rebranded it. Called it preservation instead of purchase. He froze as she approached. You weren't even born yet, he said quickly. I wasn't there. But you profited, she replied. You wore salt on your back and called it clean. You sold it in markets and said the sea had blessed you. He looked down, ashamed. She touched his hand, and he gasped. Visions poured into his mind, not just hers, but all those who had been traded before her. Women in chains. Children on boats. Mouths open in silent screams. And beneath it all, the sea, watching, waiting, remembering. When she pulled away, he could not stand. The tide reached the center of the village now, covering the shrine steps, soaking the floor of every hut. Fish flickered between doorways. Crabs scuttled across rooftops. The village began to shift, not collapse, but transform, as if the sea were reclaiming what had been stolen. Amara stood in the square once more. She looked out across the people who had watched her drown, in silence, in selfishness, in survival. Some begged. Some ran. Some fell to their knees and bowed their heads. Amara did none of those things. She only stood, her eyes shining not with vengeance, but with a tide deeper than rage, truth. And the truth was this: they had given her to the sea. And the sea had given her back. The sea continued to rise, but it did not come to destroy. It moved with intention, like a hand brushing dust from an old book. Beneath its shimmering surface, something delicate unfolded, not vengeance, but remembrance. As the villagers stood trembling in the water that now reached their waists, some waited for punishment. Others simply waited. But Amara turned not to those who had wronged her next, she turned to those who remembered. They were few, but they were there. First was Luma, the healer. She had been younger then, only just apprenticed to her mother, too poor to offer anything but her voice. But when the merchant came and the bargain was struck, she had stood between Amara and the boat for a single breath. Just one. She had said, "She is not yours to sell." No one listened. Her mother pulled her back. The crowd swallowed her protest. But Amara remembered. Now Luma was older, her back bent, her fingers stained from roots and salves. She still lived in the same hut near the hill, where wild mint grew despite the drought. She was standing knee-deep in the tide, holding her herbs above the water, staring at Amara with wide, wet eyes. "I'm sorry," Luma said softly. "I should have done more." Amara walked toward her, and the water shimmered around her ankles. She reached into her robe and pulled out a stone, pale green, smooth as skin, humming faintly in the air. "This is for the breath you tried to take," she said, placing it in Luma's hand. "Even one breath against the tide matters." Luma closed her fingers around the stone and began to cry, not with guilt, but with something cleaner, relief. Amara walked on. She came next to a hut where the walls were crooked and a child sat in the doorway, watching the water with solemn eyes. He could not have been older than 6. He did not flinch when Amara approached. He did not look afraid. "I saw you in my dreams," he said. "Before you came." She knelt beside him. "What did you see?" "You were crying, but no tears came out. You were standing in the water, but you weren't drowning. You told me something." "What did I tell you?" He frowned, thinking. "You said, you'll remember even when they don't." Amara smiled. It was small. Soft. The kind of smile that came only when something inside finally loosened its grip. She placed a shell in his lap, pink, spiraled, still damp with seawater. "If you ever need me," she said, "listen to this." The child nodded solemnly and held the shell to his ear. It began to sing. Not loudly. Not in any language. But in a way only children and the old can truly understand. Next, she found the one person whose name had never left her. His name was Sephu. They had once played together beneath the salt trees, long before the drought. He had carved a flute for her from driftwood and given it to her without explanation. When the merchant came, he had not spoken. He had stood still, holding the broken flute, his face unreadable. Now he stood waist-deep in the tide, staring at her with the same unreadable eyes. He had not aged much. His shoulders were broader, his hair longer, but his silence was the same. "I thought you would come back as a storm," he said finally. "Not as yourself." Amara reached out, and he took her hand. It was the first time anyone had touched her since she returned. "I thought I would too," she whispered. He looked at her, really looked. His gaze didn't flinch from what she had become. "I kept it," he said, pulling something from around his neck. It was the flute, cracked, weathered, but still intact. "I couldn't play it after you left. It only made ghosts." She touched the flute. It pulsed gently beneath her fingers. Then she placed her hand on his chest, over his heart. "You remember me as I was," she said. "Not as myth. Not as curse. Just a girl." He nodded. "I never stopped." She left something with him too, not an object, but a dream. That night, when he slept, he dreamed of her standing on the shore, no longer cloaked, no longer silent. She was laughing. He did not remember the sound when he woke, but his heart carried it anyway. And so it went. Amara touched each of them gently, those who had remembered, those who had mourned her not as a warning but as a life that should have been. She gave them pieces of the sea, a vial of healing water to the midwife who had once rocked her as a baby, a glowing stone to the fisherman who had prayed for her return every night, even long after he forgot her name. She did not demand worship. She did not ask for thanks. She simply reminded them. She was not a tale told to frighten daughters. She was not a symbol carved into driftwood. She had been a girl. And she had drowned. It began with the sound of water in places where water did not belong. A soft trickle beneath floorboards. A glistening bead forming at the corner of a ceiling. Damp footsteps on a mat untouched by rain. The villagers noticed, but they did not speak of it. As if to name it would hasten its coming. They simply placed stones around their doors, lit smoke to keep the air dry, muttered that it would pass, as everything always had. But the sea was not passing. It was arriving. The tide no longer came and went. It came and stayed. Not in waves, not with fury, but in silence. It curled around the roots of houses, licked at the corners of fields, seeped through the thatch and stone like breath. Chickens wandered too close to the shore and never returned. Children dreamed of swimming while asleep, woke coughing salt. The village healer found her jars filled with brine, though she had sealed them tight. And still, no one dared speak aloud what they all knew. The sea had come to collect. It did not crash. It crept. A single night passed, moonless, thick with fog, and by morning, 3 homes had vanished. Where they once stood, shallow pools shimmered with strange clarity. Eels swam in the corners of kitchens. Salt crystals formed patterns across empty beds. The villagers gathered to look, but not to question. Their voices stayed low, their eyes wary of the horizon. One by one, the trees began to change. Their bark peeled away, revealing pale flesh beneath. Leaves turned translucent, too delicate for wind. When the breeze did come, the branches sang, high, thin notes, like the whistling of a bone flute. Those who listened too long felt their memories loosen, like knots pulled gently apart. The village elder awoke one morning and could not remember her son's name. A mother walked past her own daughter without recognition. Names unraveled. Faces blurred. The salt did not take life. It took place. Even the goats forgot their way home. By the 7th night, no fires were lit. The village was quiet, not from fear, but from forgetting. People stood in doorways, not knowing why they had stepped outside. They looked toward the sea and felt no reason to run, no urge to pray. They watched the water rise as if watching a story told long ago, too distant to hold, too old to change. The salt crept higher. It etched itself into the walls, curling in script no one could read. It spread over doorframes, across floors, into cribs and cupboards and cooking pots. It coated mouths and filled lungs gently, as if whispering, "Hush, hush now, sleep." The children went first. Not screaming. Just walking. Into the tide. Holding hands. Smiling, as if someone had called their names from the shallows. The others followed. Lovers with arms around each other's shoulders. Elders with feet dragging lines in the wet sand. Not dead. Not alive. Simply forgotten. And when the final footstep vanished beneath the rising hush, the sea stilled. It was not a storm. It was not a flood. It was a remembering. A taking back. The next morning, the sun rose over what appeared to be a vast lagoon. No village. No boats. No paths. Just water, impossibly clear, and silence, the kind of silence that holds breath, not breaks it. And at its center stood a girl. Or what had once been one. A statue formed entirely of salt, tall, barefooted, cloak flowing like frozen tide. Her face held no rage, no grief. Only stillness. Eyes open. Hands relaxed at her sides. She did not point, did not accuse. She simply was. Birds did not land on her. Fish swam wide around her. Even the wind bent its path to avoid brushing her cheek. The lagoon became a place of echoes. Fishermen who strayed too near said the water shimmered with voices, not screams, but lullabies sung by girls long gone. Some left offerings, shells, braids of dried grass, dolls carved from driftwood. Others fled, unable to bear the weight of the air. No one rebuilt on that shore. The salt did not allow it. And in time, even the name of the village was lost. Carried away, grain by grain, into the sea that had taken it, not out of wrath, but memory. Because the sea does not rage. It remembers. And sometimes, when it is quiet, it comes back for what it lent. They say there was once a village by the sea, though no map shows where it stood. Ask 100 old fishermen and you'll get 100 answers, near the broken reef, just beyond the ash coast, beneath the moonshadow cliffs. But the truth is this, the village is no longer where the land remembers. The sea took it. Not in anger, but in certainty. And though the village has vanished, the story remains. It travels with wind and water, passed from tide to tide, from net to net, from mouth to mouth. It is not written in books, but in barnacled whispers and songs hummed by children who have never seen salt in the soil. They say a girl lives in the sea now. Or maybe she is the sea. She walks the shoreline at dawn, barefoot, her cloak dragging foam. Her eyes are dark as drowned stars. If you see her, you must not look too long, not unless you've lived a life without betrayal, without silence, without selling something you swore you loved. She doesn't speak. But she watches. And the tide rises behind her. Some say she blesses the boats of those who treat their daughters gently. Their sails fill even when the sky is still. Their fish jump willingly into the nets. Storms part around them like sheep around a stone. Others say she curses those who lie with clean hands. Those who smile at the hungry and take more than they need. For them, the sea turns cold. Nets tear. Masts crack. They wake in the middle of the night with salt in their mouths and no memory of how it got there. And some, the foolish ones, say she's only a myth. A tale to keep girls from wandering. But those are the same men who find fish bones woven into their clothes, who dream of a girl standing at the foot of their bed, her eyes brimming with waves that never fall. The legend has many names for her, the salt-eyed, the tide daughter, the ghost of the bargain. But no one remembers the name she was born with. No one remembers the village that gave her up. And yet all remember the warning. If you ever trade your own for salt, she will come. Far below the surface, where light softens into blue hush and silence sings in slow pulses, there is a place no anchor reaches. It is not marked on charts or named by sailors, yet it has always been there, a cathedral shaped from coral, salt, and memory. Its walls shimmer with barnacle lace. Its pillars rise like ribs carved from shipwreck bones. And at its heart, she rests. Amara. Not as she was, not the girl who walked silently into a boat, nor the cloaked figure who returned with the tide. She is still, now, and vast. She no longer breathes, yet every current is her breath. She no longer weeps, but every tide is her touch. Her body is not stone, not flesh, it is water. It is salt. It is story. She listens. Above, the sea is clean again. Children play in shallows without fear. They float on their backs and laugh at clouds. Mothers teach their daughters to float, to swim, to never fear their own weight. They sing lullabies to the waves, and the waves carry those songs down, 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 to her. She listens. And she remembers. Not with pain, but with stillness. The kind of stillness that comes after fire, after flood, after fury. She does not need revenge. She does not need to be known. She only needs to remain. Fish drift past her like prayers. Whales pause near the cathedral's spires, humming their ancient songs. Even the darkness here is kind, cool and vast and knowing. Time folds in this place. It flows backward, forward, all at once. She is the sea. And the sea does not forget. It carries the weight of every girl ever silenced. Every bargain struck in desperation. Every voice that was lost beneath the surface. But it also carries joy, the laughter of children, the dancing feet of girls who are never traded, never sold. She watches. She listens. She keeps them safe. And in the stillest part of the ocean, in the cathedral made of all that was lost, her name drifts like a tide. Not spoken. Just remembered.